In this video we are going to go through some exam questions about plants, and I will go through them with you and show you how I would answer them. The first question is about how plants absorb water and minerals. The diagram shows 3 duckweed plants in a beaker of distilled water. So we've got the picture here, got a beaker with distilled water, the duckweed plants in, and some cling film on top. The question is, explain how the water moves into these plants. So the important keyword here to underline is water. So they want to know how water moves. And if they want to know how water moves, that always means we're talking about osmosis. So the first mark here is just saying that the water moves into the plant by osmosis. Then we just need to add also, where does the water go into the plant, which part actually takes up the water. So, and that is the roots. To be more precise, the root has cells. So by osmosis into the root has cells. That is already 2 marks. By osmosis into the root has cells. And then we just need to add also kind of one thing that is special for osmosis is that it has to move through a semi-permeable membrane. So we just add through a semi-permeable membrane. And that is our first 3 marks here. Then we're going to move on to the next question. The salt was added to the water in the beaker from a salt solution. Explain how the salt solution would affect the movement of water in and out of the plant. So they want to know, how does the salt affect the movement of the water? Okay, so we need to remember that water in osmosis, it always moves from a place with a lot of water to a place with less water. If we add salt, that means there's less water on the outside. So you can just bullet point this and say there's less water now in the solution. So there's less water in the solution. And that means that the osmosis will be slower, or there will be less osmosis. So osmosis will be slower because there's less water on the outside. And that is that question done with. And we're going to move on to just a quos and tick question. Complete the sentence by putting a quos in the box next to your answer. When the concentration of mineral ions in the soil is lower than in the root hair cell, mineral ions are transported into the root hair cell by. So kind of our keywords here is concentration of the mineral ions that we should underline, and quite important here is that it's lower. Okay, so they tell us that the concentration of the mineral ions is lower than in the root hair cell. Okay, then they want to know, how are those mineral ions transported into the root hair cell if the concentration is lower outside. Okay, the options we have is diffusion, osmosis, active transport, and transpiration. So if you're not sure, it's easiest to go through and think about what does each of this mean. Diffusion means particles move from high concentration to low concentration. However, they tell us here we're going from low to high, so it can't be diffusion because it's the other way around. Osmosis is basically diffusion of water, so movement of water. But they ask us here about the mineral ions. Okay, so we're not talking about water, so it can't be osmosis. Active transport is when we go from a low to a high concentration, and it costs us energy, so we have to actually put energy in. So active transport goes from low to high. That kind of fits with what we've got here. The concentration in the soil is lower. The last bit we have is transpiration, and transpiration talks more about the movement of the water when it is already inside the plant and when it evaporates off the leaves. So this is more kind of when the water is already inside. And as I said earlier, we're not actually talking about water here. We're also not talking about what is going on inside the plant, so it can't be transpiration either. So the correct answer here is active transport. Now we're going to move on to the next question, which is about transpiration. And some are going to be a bit similar, some of these questions, to the ones we've just looked at. So here we've got a photo. Photograph A shows a coleus plant that has wilted due to lack of water. If this plant is given some water, it will recover and stand upright again. Photograph B shows the plant after it has been watered. So here we've got the wilted plant, then it's been given water, and after a while it recovers. Then the question is, just going to scroll a bit down, describe how a plant takes in water from the soil. This is really similar to the first question we looked at. We're looking at the transport of water. So how does a plant take in water? And as I said earlier, water movement always by osmosis. That's our first mark here. By osmosis. And then we need to talk about where does it go, where does a plant take it in, into, and the bit of the plant that takes in the water is the root. To be more precise, the root has cells. So by osmosis into the root hair cells. Okay, and that is our 2 marks here. If you wanted to, you could also add here again, talking about the semi-permeable membrane, that the water needs to go through that, but we don't necessarily have to because it's only 2 marks. Then we've got another tick and cross one, so I'm going to start reading it. The soil surrounding the roots of the coleus plant contains water with a higher concentration of dissolved mineral ions than in the plant cell vacuole. So quite important here, I'm going to underline that it says higher concentration of dissolved mineral ions. Which row of the table gives the method of transport of mineral ions into the plant cell of this coleus and the type of vessel which transports mineral ions to its leaves? Okay, so now here, the last time we were asked about the transport of mineral ions into roots, it said that there was a lower concentration outside. Now we have a higher concentration outside. So that's quite important, because if we go from higher to lower concentration, it's diffusion we're talking about, not active transport. So we know it's diffusion, so we can cross these out. It must be C or D. So we know it's diffusion. Now we just need to decide which type of vessel transports mineral ions. And it's the same type of vessel that transports water, and that is the xylem. Okay, so D is the correct answer here. Now we're going to go on to the last question. The water is transported from the roots up the plant by transpiration. An investigation was carried out over a 12-hour period to compare transpiration in the coleus plant with transpiration in another type of plant called begonia. The photograph shows a begonia plant. This is a begonia, and earlier in the other pictures we had the coleus plant. Now we're going to compare them. So we're going to go a bit further down here. The mass of each plant was recorded before and after the 12-hour period to find out the effect of transpiration. The investigation was repeated 5 times with the same plants. The table shows the change in mass of each plant over a 12-hour period. So we've got the change in mass in grams. We've got coleus and begonia, and we can see they've done this 5 times, so we have 5 different changes in mass for Coleus and for begonia. And then the question is, compare the water loss in the Coleus plant with the water loss in the begonia plant. So basically the change in mass, that mass is water that has been lost. And we can see if we compare the numbers here, got 3.7, 4.5, 2.8. We compare that to the begonia with 1.1, 1.3, 0.8. We can see that on average the Coleus plant loses more mass. So that's our first kind of observation we need to write down. So on average, Coleus loses more mass, and this means that it loses more water due to transpiration, because this mass is lost water. So Coleus loses more water to transpiration. And that is it. Now you have answered all the questions.